Welcome everyone to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Tuesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Coming up on the show, it is Fantasy Football Waiver Wire Day, so giving my thoughts on that. Of course, that also means that it is time for the Fantasy Football Dumpster Darlings of the Week. We got a smidge of CFL talk in there with the Power Rankings, and then the NBA season gets going tonight. Tomorrow is the start of the Raptors season, so I'm going to give a couple of total picks for the Toronto Raptors, and we'll close with some more fight stuff as it's UFC 308 this weekend, so a few fighters to watch on that card. So it should be a whole lot of fun. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. Too many buttons to click. Okay, so it is Fantasy Football Waiver Wire Day here today, and this one I actually think is one of the more impactful Fantasy Football Waiver Wire episodes of the year, with all of the injuries that we had last week, with Brandon Ayuk going down for the season, with Chris Godwin going down for the season, and for the first time with a few of these, it is not just, these guys have gone down for the season. It is these guys have gone down for the season, and there's actually kind of a replacement for them, or at least a perceived replacement for them. So I do think that this one is pretty interesting. Also, we are now getting to the point where it's time to start looking ahead to the playoffs and getting toward the trade deadline as well. So I do think that there is a little bit of intrigue coming up here with this waiver wire period here. So let's get into it. We will begin with the quarterback position. Couple streamers for this week. And the first one is Bo Nix. He's only 13% owned, going up against Carolina, who just got gashed by Marcus Mariota. Bo Nix, I'm not a huge fan of, but if I were starting a quarterback with, fate of the earth on the line, lasers pointed, Max Kellerman wants Iguodala, I would take Bo Nix over Marcus Mariota. That in the hierarchy of we need to win a football game to fate of the earth and all of those things, Bo Nix greater than sign Marcus Mariota. So I think that this Denver offense is kind of starting to find their groove a little bit. And you guys know I am not necessarily one to heap a whole lot of praise on Bo Nix, Sean Payton, or the Denver Broncos. But before this week, it was back-to-back 20-point performances. And then last week against New Orleans, they were just so thoroughly kicking their ass that they didn't need that. So there you go. And so I think that Bo Nix has a pretty good game here this week. Russell Wilson is 7% owned. I know. But facing the Giants defense that just got kind of beat up a little bit with I get through the run game here, but this has not been a Giants defense that has been overly resistant to a lot when it comes to fantasy quarterbacks this year. And so I do think that is a pretty good option. Swim Diamond asking, 10-team full PPR. My team, Lamar Jackson, Saquon Barkley, Najee Harris, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, McBride, and Garrett. Bench, Amari, DJ Moore, Brooks, I'm assuming that's Braylon Allen. Would you trade A.J. Brown for Kamara? I'm assuming the Garrett is Garrett Wilson. I was trying to think of that. Who the fuck's last name is Garrett? But I don't think I would. I think that right now, obviously, like, you have strength on a number of different areas, and this is a tremendously built fantasy football team. But I think with Saquon and with Najee, you do have a strength there. Now, having Braylon Allen kind of being the height of the depth of your team at the running back position, I do see the potential thought of throwing a Alvin Kamara into that lineup as well. But I do think that with A.J. Brown there, you still have I think potentially, honestly, you could maybe get a little bit more than just Alvin Kamara at this point, but I do also think that you don't need to really make that move. I like your running back room. I think Najee has actually been running pretty well. I know that Jalen Warren probably will factor into this offense a little bit more, but I still think you have a good running back room there. And while, yes, you do have some very talented receivers as well. I don't think you need to be making that move at this particular time. I would try to maneuver a couple of your bench pieces, and if you want to add some depth at the running back spot, but I don't think you need to be necessarily making that particular move. But yeah, guys, keep the questions coming right now in the chat, and we'll answer them as much as possible. Toxic, my decision to have Drake May paid off big time. 276, couple of touchdowns on a week where not a lot of people were doing anything at the quarterback position. It's a pretty good one, I would say. So congratulations. All right, wide receiver is where this waiver wire, I think, really takes off. Jauan Jennings is a must. He's 31% owned. He is a must-add for the rest of the season. We saw that there is value there when everyone was hurt on San Francisco. He came in. He had a pretty good rapport with Brock Purdy, and I think he can fill in now in the Brandon Ayuk role pretty well. I don't think it's just going to be straight line what you were expecting from Ayuk. You can now transfer over to Jauan Jennings, but I do think that Jennings now, in terms of what we had on the waiver wire, and look, like this has not been, as someone who's in a vampire league and who has been relying on the waiver wire all season, this has not been a gigantic season of greatness on the waiver wire. So this is about as close to a waiver wire like must that we have had all season long. Behind him at 14% is Ricky Pearsall. If you were looking at Jennings, this is a pretty good runner-up. I think that he is going to factor into this offense a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more as the season goes on. Also, as if Debo's not going to get hurt at some point this season, right? Like, he misses this game with illness. He has had some trouble staying on the field. I think he is legitimately one of the most talented wide receivers in the league, but my boy has some trouble staying on the football field. And so all of a sudden now there's a path there for Ricky Pearsall to get a little bit more volume in what is still a pretty good offense out in San Francisco. And then we get into a little bit deeper with Jalen McMillan. 8 targets. Now that is a little bit skewed. He's for Tampa Bay, by the way, for those who don't know, which... not necessarily blaming you, who's keeping up on all 3 wide receivers out in Tampa Bay. But Mike Evans was not active in that game for the Buccaneers on Monday night against Baltimore. And so I think it would be a little bit easy to just be like, oh, wow, he had 8 targets and now Godwin's out. This is a guy who can just go in and get all that volume each week. That's probably not going to be the case. And it will probably be kind of stretched out a little bit between him and Palmer in that offense. But I think McMillan is the closest, again, to a straight line. Well, Godwin's out, so this guy's going to come in and try to fill this role now. I do think, like I said, a lot of those targets are going to get spread out, but I think McMillan is going to be the one who already seemed to have a little bit of Baker Mayfield's eye anyway, and a little bit of the eye of this offense, and so I think he will be good there. And then Cedric Tillman should be available in your league. He is 0% owned. He came up with a big game with Amari Cooper out. And now the Browns offense does not have the anchor of Deshaun Watson that they need to work through now. And we will see what the quarterback situation is in Cleveland going forward. But for now, it's better than it was. And so Cedric Tillman, I think, is a very valuable add in a lot of leagues as the season kind of goes along. At running back, we don't really have the studs that we're hoping for, probably. At 25%, it's Ray Davis. He didn't have the monster week of a couple of weeks ago, but it does really seem like he is kind of the handcuff, so to speak, to James Cook if something else happens in that backfield. And he seems like a talented kid. So I think for a little bit more stash purposes, that's the way to go. And same thing goes with Sean Tucker. I thought he looked like one of the better running backs in that game last night for Tampa Bay. And again, he's not getting the volume of a couple of weeks ago, and unless someone gets hurt, the opportunities are going to be a little bit scattered. But I do think that A, if someone gets banged up, or B, he just keeps showing out, there is going to be a role for him in that offense out in Tampa Bay. And then Tyler Goodson at 14%. It might The window to throw him into the lineup might have closed if Jonathan Taylor is back in the lineup this week, but I do believe that that Tyler Goodson here has kind of taken over Sermon as the handcuff to Taylor. And if Taylor's out again, I think Goodson actually has a very realistic shot of having a pretty good fantasy week for the Indianapolis Colts. At tight end, there's a couple. One of them I'm cheating on because normally I normally go just 35% and under. But Cade Otton, I think, again, going to what is happening out in Tampa Bay with Godwin and the injury situation out with the Bucs, I think that Otton now becomes a good option and another one that Baker Mayfield trusts to maybe get a bit of a bump in the target share and potentially have a bit more of a predictable workload than some other tight ends may be having. Also, Taysom Hill at 29%. There is, according to Dennis Allen, quote, a chance that Taysom Hill plays this week, and they were using him as a Mr. Everything. He was a goal line quarterback. He was definitely getting in the offense as a tight end, and now with some injuries in this offense, all of a sudden things open up for Taysom Hill to potentially have a little bit more of the share of the offense out in New Orleans. And so if you can afford a tight end stash, if Taysom Hill isn't healthy this week, I think that would be a really valuable way to go. And then lastly, I didn't write a defense down, so we're going to search for this one live right here on the stream. I guess I don't know how I missed that, but mistakes are made, right? So, okay, here we go. Let's player list. Let's go here, all available. Let's go down to the defense and shaboing. All right, so sorting, well, the number one projected defense on the week is the Steelers defense going up against the Giants. If you're one of the 4% leagues that doesn't have Pittsburgh owned, by all means, run out and pick them up. So at under 35% owned, what do we got? We have the Rams taking on Minnesota. I would probably pass on that one. Miami against Arizona, not great. Here's the one we're going to be looking at. It is the Detroit Lions, as they are just 21% owned, going up against the Tennessee Titans offense that just loves to give the football to the other team. So there's that. That's probably the best defense we are going to find here. Just want to do one more quick little run. If Tua is out, then maybe the Atlanta defense, the Arizona defense against Miami, but that's probably not something you want to roll with. So I would say, the Detroit one is probably the way to go. Traded Devontae and MPG at the beginning of the season for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Did I fleece? Boy, it certainly kind of looks like it, right? Because the Devontae Adams situation isn't necessarily looking like it's improved. And so that's not great. As someone who I had Devontae Adams in a number of different leagues because I thought, well, he's going to get a boatload of targets out in Vegas, and then he's probably going to get traded and he's going to go to a better offense. And now he's been traded and it still didn't look that great in week one. So there's that. And then for Pittman, who I'm assuming is the MPJ that we are referring to, I think that offense has been so inconsistent that it has taken a talented wide receiver who should be kind of at least lock number 2 on most fantasy teams and made him very unreliable. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, no matter where this offense goes, and now for a couple of weeks without Jameson Williams, that no matter where this offense goes, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be there to be able to have that reliable workload, and he's talented enough that he can turn that into some pretty big games. Also, continuing off of this one from Mini Moneymaker, so after the Devontae and Pittman trade for Amon-Ra St. Brown, he said, then he dropped Devontae when he got hurt. I picked him back up and just traded him for Bowers. Yeah, that's how you do that. That is, even if all you did was just trade Devontae for Brock Bowers at the beginning of the year, that still feels like a win, considering how all over the place tight end has been and how kind of reliable Bowers has been. That feels pretty good. So that is that bravo on turning Devontae Adams and MPJ into Amon-Ra St. Brown and then Brock Bowers. That is some excellent work. And thank you, Mini Moneymaker, for the for the follow. I really do appreciate that, and welcome as a couple first-time chatters here with Swim Diamond and Mini Moneymaker. So, with you guys being new around these parts, this next part is something we do every week. It is called the Fantasy Dumpster Darlings. They are the guys who basically it's that helped no one all-stars, as every week there are a number of players who are just sitting on waiver wires without a home who come up and have some absolutely phenomenal weeks that make us realize how cruel the fantasy football world is. So let's look at it. It is the Fantasy Football Dumpster Darlings after Week 7 in the National Football League. So again, every week we run through and see the top performances from the least owned players, and this one takes the cake, I think, in terms of the least owned quotient that we have here. Just going to, yeah, okay, that's around what I thought. So, Mini Moneymaker, I see the note in chat. We'll get to it in a second. Let's run through the dumpster darlings out of Week 7. At quarterback, at 7% owned, it is Russell Wilson. 24.86 fantasy points. Didn't even look all that good, but he was one of the top performers of the quarterback spot this week. At wide receiver, Rashad Bateman, 16% owned. Comes up with a big night on Monday Night Football at 20.1 fantasy points. He was 16% owned, which is 16% more than Cedric Wilson, who came up with 14.7 fantasy points in a huge performance for this one. Also at 0% owned, Jamichael Hasty, 13.2 points out in England. Our running back number 2, Justice Hill, still 18% owned after a big open to the season, but 12.3 fantasy points. At tight end, it's Jonnu Smith, 4% owned, 19.1 fantasy points. Cedric Tillman, who we talked about before as a potential waiver wire addition, he plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's owned in 0% of leagues, 14.1 fantasy points. So we have 3 players on this list, 0% owned, 14.7, 13.2, 14.1. Will Lutz is the kicker at 6% owned, 18 fantasy points. And your defense for the Dumpster Darlings this week, the Seattle Seahawks, 17% owned, 16 fantasy points. All told, this team with a combined owned percentage of 68% comes up with 152.36 fantasy points. Just absurd what is out there every week, and just shows how much of a crapshoot all of this stuff really is. Back into the chat, Mini Moneymaker. I'm trying to trade for Jamar Chase. Will Kupp and Mason get the job done? He needs a wide receiver with JT and Etienne being out. His wide receiver 2 is also Mooney. Yeah, I think I think that should get you pretty close there, for sure. I think that with Kupp, especially now that Kupp is coming back and there being a lot of excitement around that player, I think that that should get you pretty close to a Jamar Chase. And then with Mason coming over the top, and considering the desperation at running back, not just like Taylor being out for the last little bit has probably made him desperate, but since Etienne has been out, Bigsby has kind of felt like the big dude now out there, pardon the pun. And so even with Etienne on his way back, Bigsby still feels like at the very least he's cutting into those opportunities quite drastically. So I think that you're going to get a little bit of desperation from that owner, and I think that they are going to view the step down from Chase to Kupp to not be significant enough to pass up the opportunity to add to your running back depth, at least for a little bit, while CMC is still out on the shelf. So I think that is a pretty smart move, quite frankly, and I think one that would definitely benefit you moving forward. So I think, you know what? I think they would go for it, and I think you should go for it as well. All right, that is it for the scheduled portion of the fantasy football chat. If you guys want to or have any other fantasy football thoughts, throw them in there. I am going to move on to other things, but I can always bounce back to them once those segments are done. So that is what's going on here in the chat. Now let's move on to the Canadian Football League, where we are just 1 week away from the postseason. So it is now time for one of our final power rankings of the year. It is CFL Power Rankings time, going into the last week of the regular season. Coming in at number 9, they have basically clinched this spot. I don't think I would move them out of 9 if they scored 100 against Saskatchewan this week. It is the Calgary Stampeders. Just an utterly embarrassing and abysmal performance against their former quarterback in Bo Levi Mitchell last weekend, and it just caps off what has been a horrendous season out in Calgary. And I think it is very telling when all they had left to play for was pride, and that's how they showed it. Just an awful, dreadful, terrible, no good game from the Calgary Stampeders, and very deserving of being in 9th place in the CFL Power Rankings. There are probably some U Sports teams that should be ahead of them. At number 8, it is the Ottawa Redblacks. The wheels have fallen off in a big-time way out in Ottawa, and that is, I think, very concerning heading into the postseason. And one of the things we have talked about on this show and in my 3 Down Nation piece is that this is a team that has struggled against playoff caliber teams. I believe this is now 3-7-1 against teams that are going to the postseason in the Canadian Football League. Simply not good enough when they are looking to make a push. Again, I think they have set themselves up very well for the future, but I do also think that maybe there is a touch longer to go than they would have initially thought. At 7, it is the Edmonton Elks. Kind of came crashing back down to earth a couple of weeks ago following a loss to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but still seems like there is, again, some hope for the future. At 6, it's the Hamilton Tiger Cats. A awful start to the season has really set them back and put them in a position now where they are out of the playoffs. If they could have a couple of bounces go their way in the early part of the year, and this team is going into the postseason at the right time. But Bo Levi Mitchell puts a stamp on what could be the East nominee for most outstanding player. And a lot of people are just locking it into Brady Oliveira, and that's probably not incorrect, given how well Oliveira has played for the best team in the league. And if it was MVP, it would be a lock. But Bo Levi Mitchell, I think, given the O in MOP for outstanding, I think he should be a guy that gets maybe a little bit more consideration than he is getting right now. But Hamilton playing some pretty good football. At 5, it's Montreal. They have fallen into the trap that they took advantage of a year ago, where they kind of caught Toronto napping and were able to come up with a big performance in the East Final en route to a Grey Cup. Now, Montreal hasn't played a meaningful game in like 2 months, and they look like a team that hasn't played a meaningful game in 2 months. I would suspect they take this game seriously this week against Winnipeg, given that they have the bye going into the East Final. But I still think that this is... It's very difficult to flip that switch. And now I do also think that the last time the switch was flipped positively, there was still some thought that Philpott might be coming back. He's not. And that was such a dynamic part of this offense in Montreal this year. And it just hasn't been able to get back since. And we will see what they can do here in the final week of the season. At 4, it's the BC Lions, as they, I think, put a bit of a scare in the rest of the Canadian Football League with Vernon Adams having a big performance over the weekend. He feels like he's going to be the guy that can lead this team back to the postseason and put a real threat now on either Saskatchewan or Winnipeg, and probably both, as they get ready for the West semifinal in a couple of weeks. At 3, it is the Toronto Argonauts. Again, speaking of peaking at the right time, yes, things got a little bit sideways at the end, and Ottawa made that game closer than it actually was, but make no mistake about it, Toronto is playing some very good football right now, and they are not a team I would want to be messing with as we head into the East playoffs. At 2, it's Saskatchewan, because I am a little biased, but also that this is a team that has started to put a lot together. I still think there is an explosive nature to this offense that could be unlocked a little bit more, and I do think that there is a predictability in the play calling at times, but I also think that this is a team that is defending like just absolute, like a dominant unit right now, and creating a lot of turnovers and creating a lot of pressure and rallying to the football in real exciting ways. And so I think this defense is legitimate, and I think this team right now is legitimate. They have an outside shot of hosting the West Final coming up in a couple of weeks. But number 1 right now, the team who would be hosting the West Final, if the standings stay the same, that is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They have such a great combination of an offense that has found its explosiveness and a defense that has been dominant all season long. They look like the most complete team in the Canadian Football League, and they've played like it for the better part of 3 months now. And so we are in a familiar spot heading into the postseason with Winnipeg feeling like the favorites. So those are your CFL Power Rankings for the week. Mini Moneymaker in the chat with another fantasy football note. So we're going to hit the thing just for my own editing purposes, and we'll get right into that. Mini Moneymaker in the chat. Speaking of dumpster, I'm starting AR5. I'm trying to trade I'm assuming Deontay Johnson and Kraft for Jaden Daniels. Will that get the job done? His starting tight end is likely and needs a wide receiver with Olave and Metcalf being hurt. I don't know if that's enough to get Jaden Daniels away from that owner. I think Jaden Daniels has been such a find, and this... Sometimes maybe it shouldn't play into fantasy sports, but it does. He's just been a really fun own. You know, like if you have him, you are enjoying it. This isn't like a, what it would have been with Russell Wilson last week, where it's like, yeah, I started Russell Wilson and I got 24 fantasy points, so yay, but it wasn't really a fun hang, you know? But with Jaden Daniels, it's fun. And also there is, I think, a level of excitement around that. And you could absolutely play up the injury risk. He is coming off of some bruising to the ribs. I don't know if we have a official confirmation on that, but he's going to probably play this week, but he had a rib issue, so I'm assuming bruised. But I do think that he is someone who the Jaden Daniels owner is going to view as a real marquee piece. So I do think that I think that for the most part, you would have to go a little bit higher than Deontay Johnson and Kraft to get that job done. Now, Moneymaker saying, you're going to think I'm crazy, but he doesn't value him. He's been on his bench most of the season. That is utterly insane. And so I think at that point, you could certainly pry that guy, pry Jaden Daniels away. And, like maybe you even throw in Richardson as a look if you need another depth option at QB, like just put this guy out there and just kind of roll with him that way. So yeah, if this is someone who isn't valuing Jaden Daniels, and I don't think it insults him too much to kind of lowball him with an offer. Not that Deontay and Kraft is a super lowball offer. I just don't think it would get it done. But if you want to float that out there and just see where the actual value is, I don't think that's a bad starting point if this is a guy who has his quarterback on the bench. But like Toxic says here in the chat, I have Jaden Daniels on my other fantasy league. He's been great. And yeah, like that's just... If I had him, A, I'd be starting him every week, and B, that there is no chance I would be letting him go right now, given what's going on out in Carolina with how bad that offense looked this last week with Deontay Johnson. And, I mean, Kraft has been good the last couple weeks at tight end, so I think striking while the iron is smart. And so I think it would be, if you can pull that off, like, as soon as that happens, let us know. Like I am on here 4 days a week. So as soon as you can make that trade, run, don't walk back to this chat and let us know how that goes. But most leagues, I would be surprised if that works. But if this is a guy, like if you're trading that for a backup quarterback, most teams would take that for their backup quarterback right now. So this is a prime example of know your league mates and know your league situation and see if you can kind of take advantage of that. So yeah, keep the fantasy stuff coming in the chat. Same thing as before. I'll finish the segment and then we will get we'll get right back to the fantasy comments. It is the start of the NBA season tonight. A couple of games. It is the Celtics taking on the Knicks. It is ring night for Boston with the New York Knickerbockers hanging out right there. Also, as Toxic was saying in the chat before I came live on here today when we were just doing the stream is waiting thing, it's Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves against the Los Angeles Lakers. Why? Who else is playing in this game? But either way, a couple of games in the NBA tonight. For our purposes, the Toronto Raptors get going with the season tomorrow, and so that gives us one more day to wrap up Toronto Raptors previews. So let's get to it. Gonna have to change that a little bit. It's not the Toronto Raptor podcast anymore, just the Toronto Raptor segments here on Couch Potato Diary. But looking at player totals today, we have gone through potential breakouts, potential X factors. Normally we do potential fall-offs, but no one played well enough last year that they're going to fall off this year. So we've gone through a few different things. Now it is time to look at a couple of stat projections, I guess, that the Toronto Raptors may hit this season. And so these are provided in kind of season-long point total things like we did with the wins yesterday. And so once again, for the fine overlords at Twitch, none of this is actual gambling advice. This is just a, hey, I think that A, these point thresholds that they give us are an interesting talking point, and B, this is just a what I would consider, not necessarily what I think you should do. So, with that all in mind, let's take a look at a few of them here. First is RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, 20 plus points per game each at plus 200. I feel like I can't really say I think Emmanuel Quickley is actually going to be a breakout player in the whole NBA this year, not just with the Toronto Raptors, and then think he's going to get under 20 points per game. With the Raptors last year, he was around 18 and a half. I think it was 18.7. So he was right in kind of that area. And so I think that there is a real opportunity, given, again, him being more of a focal point in this offense and him seemingly having what should be stylistically a pretty good rapport with Scotty Barnes. I think that should be something that helps get him to that 20-point threshold. With RJ Barrett, there is a bit of an injury concern right now, but I do also think that he averaged, I think it was 23 points a game, or 22, 23 points a game last season. I should actually kind of look this up because he's coming up again here in a second. But I think that A, he played really well with the Raptors. He was at 21.8 points a game with the Raps last season. I was at 18.2 with the Knicks. But again, there's going to be more opportunities for him to score the basketball. And coming off of an Olympics where he looked phenomenal, I do think that there might be a little bit of a boost for RJ Barrett. And so I think the only thing that can hold you back in this is an RJ Barrett injury, and I didn't look, to be perfectly honest, to see if there was he has to play X amount of games. And so if he plays 5 and averages 30, then blows his leg up, look at that, we hit. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but you know what I mean. So I think that is one, and it's sitting at plus 200 right now, where I found this. So that I think is a pretty good one to look at. I would be taking that if you were into that sort of a thing. Another one is RJ Barrett specific. He is, again, averaged 21 and a bit points per game with the Raptors. This one is saying RJ Barrett to get 23 plus points per game and 6 plus rebounds per game. He had 6.7 rebounds a game last year with the Raptors, and again, averaged 21 point whatever it was points per game with the Raps, just over 21 points per game. And so again, I think now there is an opportunity for him to step up into that role. Also, the one thing that concerns you about the rebounding thing is that while the Knicks had Mitchell Robinson and stuff like that, they didn't necessarily, and I guess Hartenstein as well, so they did have a couple of rebounders there. But with Pirtle and Barnes, those guys tend to gobble up quite a few of those boards, and so I do worry that maybe they won't all be there for RJ Barrett this season, depending on how the Raptors maybe utilize him on the offensive side of things or whatever. But I still think that to assume he sticks around at the same rebounding total he did a year ago, and maybe a slight tick up in the points, given where he is at in this Raptors offense, and a level of comfort now, having a full, I guess not a full training camp because he was injured, but at least having that full off season, and again, the boost coming from the Olympics, I just think all of that together leads to what should be a positive year for RJ Barrett. And so I also like to take this one again, over on 23 points per game and over on 6 rebounds per game, getting you at plus 250. And the last one is Scotty Barnes, 5 plus triple doubles this season. If he gets 5, we get this one. It's at plus 150. And for Scotty Barnes, he had 5 last year. And now again, we are assuming a touch of development in his game. I don't know how well the team is going to do, but that could lead to extra rebound opportunities, at least. But I'm interested to see what kind of distribution they use in terms of who the offense is running through. And so if it is definitely a little bit more quickly heavy with the basketball, then all of a sudden there might be a bit of an issue with us getting to that number in the assist category. But I think he is so clearly the number one scoring option on this team and has shown to be a very good rebounder. I think there are going to be enough nights that the assists are there that this is a pretty wise play at plus 150. 50. For more NBA on the YouTube channel right now, just search Couch Potato Diary. There is the mega preview that's going to come out in podcast form as soon as this episode here on Twitch is done. So check out the mega preview, which is a combination of all of the preview segments we did, all thrown into one and put out there on the YouTubes, and it'll be available in podcast form as well. And we'll do the same thing with the Raptors stuff early tomorrow. Certainly not going to be the, I think this one ended up clocking in at a couple of hours for the mega NBA preview. It's certainly not going to be that. It might not even make it to half an hour, but it'll be a nice little combination of everything that is going on. And the interesting part about the NBA mega preview, if I may, is you can kind of tell, like the Randall trade happens in the middle of it, or the Cat trade happens in the middle of it. And so you can kind of hear where some of the predictive, like, okay, well, maybe this could happen and this would shift this, and then the reaction to it as well, and how we kind of had to pivot on that. So I think there's some interesting stuff in there. Toxic asking, you think Scotty Barnes is a bona fide number one option in this league? I think he's a bona fide number one option on the Raptors. I think in a perfect world for a Scotty Barnes, he would probably be, from an offensive standpoint, a number 2 or maybe even number 3. I mean, obviously, a perfect world, he's like a number 10 option and you're on a super team. But for realistic purposes, I think if he was a 2 as an offensive option, I think you'd be okay. And I think a 3, it would kind of be perfect, but I think where he really shines is his ability to play all over the floor, right? Like, he can defend multiple positions, and I think the defensive aspect of it is what really does kind of help you with him and make you feel like that this is someone who was deserving of being an all-star and can be a number one guy on a team because of what he can do at the defensive end of the floor, and then the offensive side has improved to the point where he at least can be a number one, and it's not laughable, although maybe a few less ISOs for him at the end of basketball games might be beneficial to this team's long-term success. But so from a scoring standpoint, I don't think he's a bona fide number one. But from a overall team constructing standpoint, I think you can build around this guy and have a pretty successful team. I do. Okay, it is now time to shift to the face-punching stuff, as UFC 308 goes down this weekend. And we went through the main event fighters yesterday. Today is a look at some of the other fighters you should be paying attention to this weekend. UFC 308 goes down at Etihad Arena in Abu Dhabi. In the main event, it is Ilia Topuria defending the featherweight championship against Max Holloway, with Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev deciding who the next challenger at 185 pounds will be. Those two, excellent fights. But there are some other real good names that you should keep an eye on this weekend. So here are 4 fighters to keep an eye on for UFC 308. Our first one is actually a fight, not just a fighter. It's but a couple of fighters. Magomed Ankalaev taking on Alexander Rakic. And I think this one, if we have a definitive winner, probably comes away as a number one contenders bout at 205 pounds. So again, we're getting a pretty good card this weekend with a all-time great taking on kind of the next one at 145 pounds, and what I believe to be at least 2 number one contenders fights at middleweight and then at light heavyweight. When you look at the rankings right now, Magomed Ankalaev is sitting in a tie for number one contender with Yuri Prochazka, while Rakic is at 5th. And when you look at the names kind of in between them, also tied with Ankalaev is Yuri Prochazka. Pereira's done that. Jamal Hill, Pereira's done that. Jan Blachowicz, Pereira done that. And then after, immediately, is Nikita Krylov, who no one's asking for, and Khalil Roundtree, where we just saw that. So I think it is probably pretty obvious, actually, that this is a number one contenders fight at 205 pounds with a couple of very intriguing fighters in Ankalaev and in Rakic. Ankalaev, 32 years old, coming off of a win over Johnny Walker after the accidental illegal knee disqualification at UFC 294. And then he did have a title opportunity before but a draw with Jan Blachowicz, and then he just didn't get another title opportunity after that. So now he has a chance to move back into that category with a win. Meanwhile, Rakic, 32 years old, is coming off of back-to-back losses against Blachowicz and Prochazka. But again, knee injury is the reason for the one loss against Jan Blachowicz, and then he does get knocked out by Yuri Prochazka in what was a bit of a surprising performance and a turn back the clock performance by Prochazka at UFC 300. I do think that you would get a bit of a pushback from certainly from Yuri Prochazka if he were to get the win. If Rakic were to get the win and leapfrog Prochazka, given that he just beat him. But after that fight, Prochazka went on to lose to Alex Pereira. So I really do think that, given the only guy ahead of these guys right now just lost his second fight to Pereira, it really doesn't feel like that is necessarily a path that is open to him right now. So I think that this really does kind of drive home that this is a number one contenders fight at 205 pounds. The next one is Sharabutin Magomedov. Apologies for the pronunciation. Obviously, he's a cat who's got a bit of a unique look, and he has also been winning fights. And I do think that there is a ceiling on where this guy can go in terms of talent levels and things like that. But I also do like that there has been a hesitancy to really rocket him up. I think that given his popularity in this part of the world, and again, you put this guy out there for an interview as a cage fighter, and you're going to get a lot of attention to it. There would be, I think, at different times, a rush to, all right, that title shot this motherfucker. Let's go. Let's just throw him in there and really lock this thing down and get this guy into a bunch of opportunities, and then you put him into a spot he's not ready for and gets the hell beat out of him. I don't think that is going to be the case here. I think that this is someone who they are really slow rolling it with and just letting him go out there, letting him get those wins. He is undefeated, and he's winning all these fights, and they're not kind of rushing it. So I do like how they have approached his growth and his development so far. And the last one is Farid Basharat, who is coming into this one, again, undefeated. He has fought, I think, 2 guys with Wikipedia pages. So again, this isn't a hot shot rising up. This guy wins this fight and he's going to get a title opportunity. He's probably a fight away from being a fight away from a top 15 sort of a look even. But this is still, at 27 years old, he has just been racking up win after win after win. Comes off of a victory on the Contender Series, is now 3-0 in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. I think that this is a guy that we should be watching out for on the undercard to see, like, maybe there is a progression here, and this is someone who could be in for a pretty big 2025 if things continue to go his way. So those are the non-main event fighters that you should be watching for on UFC 208. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be looking at some other UFC fight announcements and the rest of the UFC calendar as we get ready to head off into 2025. That's going to do it for the show today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, you can find me on social media. I am at Primetime Klein, Twitter, Instagram, and on TikTok, twitch.tv/primetimepk. Also, kick.com/primetimepk. I haven't really done a whole lot there since we were having some of the sync issues, but that is another platform that I'm going to start to go over to a little bit more. It'll be kind of like what we did here with a bit of the soft launch sort of a thing there, and just kind of work out some of the kinks before we really launch anything new on that channel. As for me, for the rest of the day, you can find me on Game Over Calgary tonight. That is on the Game Over Calgary YouTube channel immediately after the Flames and the Pittsburgh Penguins wrap it up. And then tomorrow, we're right back here, 10 o'clock. It is another Couch Potato Diary stream. It is NFL Power Rankings day. Like I said, some more UFC, maybe a little bit of NBA reaction, and some Flames reaction as well. And then we'll do another video game stream coming out on Wednesday. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and I will talk to all of you later. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.